Hello and welcome. Tonight, I'm going to whisper to you about one of the most fascinating and secretive units of World War II, a unit that didn't use weapons or tanks to fight, but rather deception and illusion. Imagine a battlefield where not everything is as it seems, where inflatable tanks roll across the plains, false radio transmissions are heard, and the sounds of marching soldiers fill the air, even though no soldiers are there. This is the story of the Ghost Army, a special unit of artists, actors, and sound engineers who used their creativity and cleverness to outsmart the enemy. Their mission was simple: to deceive the German forces and give the Allied armies the advantage. As we explore the hidden world of the Ghost Army, you'll discover how they used fake equipment, sound effects, and misinformation to create entire phantom armies that confused and misled the Germans at crucial moments during the war. These remarkable tactics saved countless lives and helped shape the outcome of some of the most important battles in World War II. So, find a comfortable place to relax, close your eyes, and let me guide you through the incredible story of how art, sound, and imagination became powerful tools of war. This is a tale of creativity, bravery, and a secret mission that changed the course of history. Join me as we uncover the secrets of the Ghost Army. Why the Ghost Army was created. The Ghost Army of World War II was born out of necessity. By 1944, as the war raged on in Europe, the Allies were preparing for large-scale operations that would require innovative strategies to outmaneuver the formidable German forces. The creation of this unique and unconventional unit, officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, was part of a broader strategy to use deception as a weapon. But how did this idea come about? Why would a military force choose to rely on illusion instead of sheer firepower? The inspiration for the Ghost Army came from a deep understanding that, in war, perception could be just as powerful as reality. If the enemy could be made to believe in the presence of large, threatening forces in one location, the Allies could then execute real maneuvers elsewhere with fewer risks of confrontation. This tactic, known as military deception, wasn't entirely new, but the Ghost Army elevated it to an art form. Instead of merely hiding their true movements, the Allies would create an entirely fake army that looked, sounded, and moved like the real thing. The idea for such a unit was influenced by the success of similar deception operations earlier in the war. British forces had used dummy tanks and aircraft in North Africa to mislead German Field Marshal Rommel about the strength and positioning of their forces. However, the Americans sought to take this concept even further, developing a dedicated unit that would specialize in large-scale deception across multiple dimensions: visual, sonic, and radio. This is where the Ghost Army came in. Comprised of roughly 1,100 men, the unit included artists, designers, sound engineers, and even actors, people with creative skills, not typically associated with warfare. These soldiers were tasked with creating elaborate illusions that would mislead the enemy into believing that entire divisions of Allied troops were present in areas where there were none. One of the leading figures behind the Ghost Army's formation was Colonel Billy Harris, who understood that creativity and innovation were key to deception. He envisioned a unit that could deploy rapidly, set up a convincing display of military power, and disappear just as quickly before the Germans could detect the ruse. The soldiers in the Ghost Army were trained in the art of war, but their real weapon was their ability to trick the enemy's eyes, ears, and minds. The creation of this unit was kept secret from almost everyone, including most Allied soldiers. Only a handful of high-ranking officers knew about the Ghost Army's true purpose. This secrecy was essential to the unit's success. If the Germans had discovered that such a unit existed, the effectiveness of their tactics would have been greatly diminished. As we move deeper into the story of the Ghost Army, you'll discover how these soldiers crafted illusions so convincing that they altered the course of major battles. From inflatable tanks to fake radio transmissions, their work became one of the war's most intriguing and least known success stories. Art meets war, recruitment of artists, actors, and designers. The Ghost Army was unlike any other military unit in World War II. While most divisions were comprised of hardened soldiers and combat veterans, this unique unit brought together a surprising array of creative minds, artists, designers, actors, and sound engineers. Their mission wasn't to fight with guns and bombs, but with imagination and ingenuity. The recruitment of these unconventional soldiers was key to the success of the Ghost Army, and their talents turned deception into a powerful weapon. The decision to recruit artists and designers for military purposes was not accidental. The U.S. military recognized that traditional combat tactics wouldn't be enough to outwit the German forces. They needed specialists who could think outside the box, who understood how to create believable illusions, and who could turn the battlefield into a stage where the enemy would be the unsuspecting audience. Thus, the recruitment drive for the Ghost Army targeted a wide range of professionals from creative fields. Among the recruits were men from prestigious art schools like the Pratt Institute and the Yale School of Fine Arts. These individuals were skilled in painting, sculpture, and design, talents that would prove invaluable in creating lifelike decoys. These artists were tasked with constructing inflatable tanks, trucks, and even aircraft that, from a distance, looked exactly like the real thing. Using rubber and canvas, they built full-scale replicas of military vehicles that could be quickly deployed to create the illusion of an army on the move. But the Ghost Army's deception wasn't limited to visual tricks. Sound engineers were recruited to add another layer of realism to the operation. These men were skilled in the emerging field of audio technology and were tasked with creating recordings of tanks rumbling, soldiers marching, and artillery firing. Using large speakers mounted on vehicles, the Ghost Army broadcast these sounds over miles of terrain, making it seem as though a massive force was advancing, when in reality, there was no one there. The Germans, hearing the sounds of engines and heavy equipment, often shifted their focus to these phantom armies, allowing real Allied troops to move in other directions. Actors and stage designers also played a key role in the Ghost Army's operations. These recruits, many of whom had worked in theater before the war, were experts in crafting believable sets and scenes. Their experience in stage design helped them create fake airfields, command posts, and supply depots that fooled German reconnaissance. The Ghost Army's sets were so convincing that even Allied pilots flying overhead sometimes mistook them for real military installations. The role of the actors in the unit went beyond stagecraft. Some of them posed as high-ranking officers, complete with forged identification papers and uniforms. Their job was to interact with local populations, Allied soldiers, and even enemy spies, spreading false information about troop movements and military plans. These performances were critical in maintaining the deception. By acting as if there were real divisions stationed in certain areas, these soldiers helped to solidify the illusion created by the Ghost Army's visual and auditory tricks. One notable recruit was Bill Blass, who would later become a famous fashion designer. During the war, however, his creativity was directed towards camouflaging equipment and designing decoys. His flair for design made him a natural fit for the Ghost Army, and his contributions helped shape the unit's innovative approach to deception. The unit also included sound specialist Corporal Stanley Nance, whose expertise in sound engineering was crucial in perfecting the Ghost Army's sonic deceptions. Nance and his team used sophisticated equipment to create recordings that were played back through massive speakers, amplifying the sound of troops and vehicles. These sound effects were carefully crafted to match the terrain, weather, and distance, making them highly believable. The attention to detail in these operations was astonishing, and the results were devastatingly effective. The recruitment of such a diverse group of creative professionals was a stroke of genius. These men, who had never imagined themselves as soldiers, became essential to the war effort, using their unique talents to deceive, distract, and confuse the enemy. The Ghost Army became a force unlike any other, blending art, sound, and theater into a military operation that saved countless lives and helped to secure key victories for the Allies. As we move forward, we'll dive deeper into the tools of deception, how inflatable tanks, fake convoys, and sonic warfare were deployed on the battlefield to create one of the most effective military illusions in history. Inflatable tanks and fake convoys, the arsenal of illusion. The Ghost Army's success lay not only in the creativity of its soldiers, but also in the innovative tools they used to create convincing illusions. One of the most surprising and ingenious elements of their arsenal was the use of inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery. These rubber replicas, combined with carefully orchestrated movements and sounds, allowed the Ghost Army to simulate entire divisions of troops and vehicles, fooling German reconnaissance and diverting enemy forces from real Allied operations. The idea of using inflatable tanks and vehicles came from the need to create a quick, mobile solution for large-scale deception. Traditional military equipment, like tanks and artillery, was difficult to move and could only be deployed in certain areas. Inflatable replicas, on the other hand, were lightweight, easy to transport, and could be set up in a matter of hours. The Ghost Army's engineers and designers worked tirelessly to perfect these decoys, making sure that they looked as realistic as possible from the air and from a distance. The process of creating these decoys was an art in itself. Inflatable tanks were designed to mimic the size and shape of real Sherman and M4 tanks, complete with details like turrets, gun barrels, and tracks. Once inflated, these tanks were strategically placed on the battlefield, often arranged in formations to simulate an entire armored division. The soldiers of the Ghost Army would then adjust the positioning of these tanks, moving them as if they were real military equipment. From the air, it was nearly impossible to tell that these tanks were nothing more than rubber inflatables. But the visual deception didn't stop with tanks. The Ghost Army also used inflatable trucks, jeeps, and even aircraft to create the illusion of a fully mobilized force. These decoys were deployed along roads, in fields, and near key locations to make it appear as though the Allies were preparing for a large-scale offensive. In reality, there were no troops in these areas, just carefully crafted illusions designed to confuse the enemy. One of the most impressive aspects of the Ghost Army's operations was the coordination required to make these inflatables believable. The unit didn't just place a few decoys and hope for the best. They created entire fake camps, complete with tents, supply depots, and headquarters. Soldiers would go through the motions of setting up camp, performing drills, and creating the appearance of an active military base. To the German reconnaissance planes flying overhead, it appeared as though a massive army was preparing for an assault. In addition to the visual deception, the Ghost Army used fake convoys to create the illusion of troop movements. Convoys of empty trucks and jeeps would drive along roads, turning in circles or moving in loops to give the impression that large numbers of troops were being transported to a new location. These convoys were often accompanied by the sound of engines and radio communications, adding another layer of authenticity to the deception. The Germans, relying on aerial reconnaissance and interceptive radio transmissions, were often fooled by these fake convoys. They believed they were seeing real divisions moving across the battlefield, and as a result, they redirected their forces to counter these phantom armies. This allowed the real Allied troops to move with less resistance, positioning themselves for critical operations without drawing enemy attention. The Ghost Army's use of inflatables and fake convoys became a cornerstone of their deception tactics. By creating the illusion of overwhelming military strength, they were able to mislead the enemy and gain a strategic advantage. The success of these operations depended not only on the realism of the inflatables but also on the careful planning and execution by the soldiers who deployed them. The effectiveness of these decoys was proven time and time again. During the Normandy campaign, for example, the Ghost Army used inflatable tanks and fake convoys to convince the Germans that a major Allied offensive was imminent in one area, while the real attack took place elsewhere. This misdirection helped to secure key victories and ultimately contributed to the success of the D-Day landings. As we continue to explore the Ghost Army's story, we'll delve into the world of sound deception, how sonic warfare was used to enhance the illusion of military might and further confuse the enemy. Sonic warfare, broadcasting the sounds of a fake army. While the Ghost Army's inflatable tanks and fake convoys were essential to their deception tactics, their success also relied heavily on sound. In warfare, the sounds of an army, rumbling tanks, marching troops, and the hum of equipment can be as convincing as the sight of it. The Ghost Army recognized this and used sonic warfare to enhance their illusions, creating the auditory illusion of entire divisions on the move. This tactic, known as sonic deception, was just as important as the visual tricks they employed. Sonic deception involved broadcasting pre-recorded sounds of military operations across the battlefield. These sounds were carefully designed to match the conditions on the ground, making them believable to the enemy listening from miles away. The Ghost Army's sound engineers, many of whom had backgrounds in radio and audio technology, were tasked with recording the noises of tanks, artillery, trucks, and even the chatter of soldiers. These recordings were then played back using massive loudspeakers mounted on trucks, capable of broadcasting sound across great distances. The success of sonic deception depended on attention to detail. The sound engineers had to consider everything from the type of terrain the troops were supposedly moving over to the weather conditions at the time. For example, the sound of tanks moving over a gravel road would be different from the sound of tanks moving through a muddy field. The engineers also had to calculate how far the sound would travel and adjust the volume accordingly. Too loud, and it would give away the trick. Too quiet, and it wouldn't be convincing. Every detail mattered. One of the most notable sonic operations took place in 1944 during the build-up to the D-Day landings. The Ghost Army was tasked with creating the illusion of a large force preparing to attack a different location from the actual landing site. The sound team recorded the noises of tanks and vehicles moving through the countryside, along with the voices of soldiers preparing for battle. These recordings were then played back over the loudspeakers, creating the auditory impression that an entire armored division was assembling. German forces, hearing these sounds, repositioned their troops to defend against the supposed attack, leaving the real landing site less defended. The engineers also made use of a technique called sonic layering, where they played multiple soundtracks simultaneously to create a more complex and realistic soundscape. For example, the sound of trucks might be layered with the clanking of equipment, distant explosions, and the chatter of soldiers. This created the impression of a bustling, active military camp, even though no such camp existed. The Germans were particularly susceptible to sonic deception because they relied heavily on both radio intercepts and aerial reconnaissance to gather intelligence. When the sounds of tanks, trucks, and soldiers were heard in conjunction with visual sightings of inflatable tanks and fake convoys, the deception was complete. The Germans believed they were facing a large force and adjusted their strategy accordingly. One of the most interesting aspects of the Ghost Army's sonic warfare was the psychological effect it had on the enemy. The sounds of an approaching army could instill fear and uncertainty, causing the Germans to second-guess their intelligence and overestimate the strength of the Allied forces. This confusion often led to hesitation or missteps in German strategy, giving the Allies a critical advantage. The Ghost Army's use of sound as a weapon was revolutionary for its time. It demonstrated that warfare wasn't just about physical strength, but about perception and misdirection. By manipulating what the enemy saw and heard, the Ghost Army was able to control their movements and outmaneuver them on the battlefield. As we move forward in the story of the Ghost Army, we'll explore how they used radio trickery and false communications to further mislead the enemy and secure victory for the Allies. Radio trickery, false communications, and signals intelligence. While visual and sonic deception played a significant role in the Ghost Army's operations, one of their most effective tactics was the use of radio trickery. The German forces relied heavily on intercepted radio communications to track the movements and intentions of the Allied armies. The Ghost Army, knowing this, turned the radio into a powerful tool for misinformation, sending out false signals and fake communications to completely mislead the enemy's intelligence services. The Ghost Army's radio operators, often trained actors or skilled communicators, crafted elaborate false communications designed to simulate the movements and actions of entire divisions that didn't actually exist. These radio broadcasts were often filled with detailed yet completely fabricated information, discussions about supply needs, troop movements, and strategies that the Germans were eager to intercept. This flood of false information created a smokescreen of confusion, forcing German forces to divert resources to counter threats that were purely imaginary. One of the most important aspects of radio deception was the authenticity of the transmissions. The Ghost Army radio operators didn't just invent random messages, they meticulously studied how real divisions communicated. This meant understanding the specific jargon, codes, and military language that would be used by different units. For example, an infantry division would have a different communication style than an armored division or an artillery unit. The radio operators adopted these styles to ensure that their transmissions were indistinguishable from those of real Allied forces. The operators also mimicked the personalities and communication habits of actual radio operators from real divisions. This added layer of authenticity was crucial because the Germans were often familiar with the distinct voices and speaking patterns of Allied operators they had been intercepting for months. By imitating these voices and styles, the Ghost Army's radio operators made their transmissions even more believable, further selling the illusion of entire divisions moving across the battlefield. Radio trickery wasn't just about transmitting fake information, it was also about timing and coordination. The Ghost Army's radio operators worked in tandem with the visual and sonic deception units. For example, while inflatable tanks were being deployed in one area and sonic warfare created the sounds of troop movements, the radio operators would simultaneously broadcast messages about those fake operations. These coordinated efforts created a seamless illusion of a large force preparing for battle, which the Germans believed to be real. One of the most significant operations involving radio trickery was during Operation Fortitude, the elaborate deception campaign leading up to the D-Day landings. The Ghost Army played a key role in convincing the Germans that the main Allied invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais, far from the actual landing site in Normandy. Ghost Army radio operators created a network of fake communications that suggested the buildup of a massive Allied force in the area, complete with discussions of logistical challenges, supply orders, and fake orders for troop movements. The Germans, relying on these intercepted communications, were fooled into believing that the invasion would take place at Calais, allowing the real D-Day landings in Normandy to proceed with less resistance. The success of radio trickery lay in its ability to exploit the enemy's trust in their own intelligence-gathering systems. The Germans believed they were gaining valuable information by intercepting Allied radio transmissions, but in reality, they were being fed a steady diet of lies. This led to strategic miscalculations that gave the Allies a significant advantage in key battles. The Ghost Army's use of radio deception was a testament to the creativity and intelligence of its members. These soldiers understood that warfare wasn't just about physical strength or firepower, it was about controlling the narrative. By feeding the Germans false information, they were able to manipulate the battlefield without firing a single shot. As we continue, we'll explore the role of camouflage and how the Ghost Army concealed the real troops while projecting their fake ones, further adding to the confusion of the German forces. The role of camouflage, concealing the real troops. While the Ghost Army's primary mission was to create false military divisions, an equally important aspect of their operations was the concealment of real Allied forces. Camouflage played a vital role in this effort. By hiding the actual movements of troops, tanks, and equipment, the Ghost Army ensured that their deceptive tactics were successful and that the enemy remained focused on the phantom armies they had created. Camouflage in warfare was not a new concept by the time of World War II, but the Ghost Army took it to new heights. The unit was tasked with not only hiding the real troops but also making sure that their fake forces appeared to be the primary focus of enemy attention. This dual role, making the real invisible and the fake visible, was critical to the success of Allied operations in key moments of the war. The Ghost Army's camouflage experts were masters of visual deception. They used a combination of nets, paint, natural materials, and carefully designed decoys to blend Allied equipment and soldiers into their surroundings. Tanks, trucks, and artillery were painted with patterns that mimicked the environment, from forested areas to open fields. These patterns disrupted the outlines of the vehicles, making them difficult to spot from the air or from a distance. One of the most effective camouflage tactics was the use of dummy positions. While real troops were hidden, the Ghost Army set up fake encampments, complete with tents, vehicles, and even laundry hanging on clotheslines. These dummy camps were designed to draw the enemy's attention, leading them to believe that a large Allied force was gathering in a particular area. In reality, the real troops were preparing for battle elsewhere, safely concealed under a veil of camouflage. The role of camouflage extended beyond the battlefield. In some cases, the Ghost Army used camouflage techniques to hide entire airfields or supply depots, ensuring that the Germans couldn't accurately target critical infrastructure. The unit also worked to conceal the movement of supplies and reinforcements, using false roads and tracks to divert attention from the actual routes being used by the Allies. During Operation Fortitude, the Ghost Army's use of camouflage was particularly vital. As the Allies prepared for the D-Day landings, real troops, tanks, and equipment were concealed in areas where the Germans least expected them. Meanwhile, the Ghost Army created the illusion of a massive force building up in Pas-de-Calais, using both fake equipment and carefully camouflaged real equipment to enhance the deception. The Germans, misled by these efforts, diverted their attention and forces away from Normandy, allowing the real invasion to proceed with less resistance. Camouflage wasn't just about visual deception, though. It also involved sound and movement. The Ghost Army coordinated their camouflage efforts with sonic warfare and radio trickery to create a complete picture of a military presence where there was none. By hiding the sounds of real troop movements and broadcasting the sounds of fake ones, they were able to fully control what the Germans saw and heard. The success of these camouflage efforts was a testament to the creativity and ingenuity of the Ghost Army. By making the real invisible and the fake impossible to ignore, they played a crucial role in securing key victories for the Allies. The ability to blend into the environment while projecting strength in another location gave the Allies the upper hand in many operations, allowing them to outmaneuver the Germans without engaging in direct combat. As we move further into the story of the Ghost Army, we will look at the critical role they played in one of the most important operations of the war, D-Day. The next chapter will explore how the Ghost Army's deceptions helped pave the way for the success of the Normandy landings. Operation Fortitude, the Ghost Army's role in D-Day. As the Allies prepared for one of the largest and most important military operations of World War II, the D-Day landings at Normandy, the Ghost Army played a critical role in ensuring the success of the invasion. This deception campaign, known as Operation Fortitude, was designed to convince the German military that the main Allied invasion would take place at Pas-de-Calais, far from the actual landing site in Normandy. The Ghost Army, with its unique blend of visual, sonic, and radio deception, became an essential part of this carefully orchestrated plan. Operation Fortitude was divided into two main components, Fortitude North and Fortitude South. Fortitude North aimed to deceive the Germans into believing that an Allied invasion would target Norway, while Fortitude South focused on misleading them into expecting an attack on Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. It was in Fortitude South that the Ghost Army played a starring role. In the months leading up to D-Day, the Ghost Army created the illusion of a massive Allied force gathering in southeastern England. They used inflatable tanks, trucks, and aircraft to simulate an armored division poised for an invasion at Calais. Fake airfields, supply depots, and troop encampments were constructed, complete with tents, vehicles, and even laundry hanging on lines to suggest a fully mobilized military presence. From the air, it appeared as though a formidable army was preparing to cross the Channel, ready to strike at Pas-de-Calais. One of the key elements of Operation Fortitude was the use of radio trickery. The Ghost Army's radio operators broadcast fake communications, mimicking the movements and operations of real divisions. These messages were intercepted by the Germans, who believed they were gathering valuable intelligence on Allied troop movements. The Ghost Army's radio operators, using their knowledge of military communication styles and codes, created an entire network of false transmissions that suggested a large-scale invasion was imminent at Calais. This false buildup of forces wasn't just a visual and radio illusion. The Ghost Army also employed sonic deception, using pre-recorded sounds of troops, tanks, and trucks to make it seem as though an entire army was on the move. These sounds were broadcast across the countryside, adding another layer of realism to the deception. The Germans, relying on their aerial reconnaissance and radio intercepts, were thoroughly convinced that the main Allied invasion would take place at Pas-de-Calais. One of the most significant achievements of Operation Fortitude was its success in keeping the German forces off balance during the critical period leading up to D-Day. The Germans, convinced that Calais was the primary target, held their best divisions in reserve, waiting for an attack that never came. Even after the landings at Normandy on June 6, 1944, the Germans continued to believe that the real invasion was still to come at Calais, thanks to the ongoing efforts of the Ghost Army and other deception units. The Ghost Army's work during Operation Fortitude directly contributed to the success of the Normandy landings. By drawing German attention away from the real invasion site, they helped to ensure that the Allied forces at Normandy faced less resistance. The deception gave the Allies a critical advantage, allowing them to establish a foothold in Europe and begin the long campaign to liberate the continent from Nazi control. The success of Operation Fortitude highlighted the importance of deception in warfare. The Ghost Army's ability to manipulate what the enemy saw and heard, combined with the larger strategic efforts of the Allied commanders, demonstrated that warfare wasn't just about physical strength, but about control of information and perception. Their efforts during D-Day were one of the most significant examples of military deception in history, proving that a carefully crafted illusion could change the course of a war. As we continue to explore the Ghost Army's incredible story, the next chapter will delve into the psychological impact of their tactics on the German troops and how fear and confusion became powerful weapons in the Allies' arsenal. Psychological warfare, the impact on German troops. While the Ghost Army's use of visual and sonic deception played a critical role in the Allied victory, the psychological impact of their tactics on German forces was equally profound. The Ghost Army's ability to manipulate the enemy's perceptions and create confusion on the battlefield turned fear and uncertainty into powerful weapons. This form of psychological warfare, which relied on misleading the enemy through elaborate illusions, left German troops second-guessing their intelligence and weakened their strategic decisions. One of the key elements of psychological warfare is instilling doubt in the enemy's mind. The Ghost Army's ability to make their inflatable tanks and fake convoys look and sound like real military forces caused the Germans to constantly question what was real and what wasn't. As the Germans relied heavily on aerial reconnaissance and intercepted communications, they often believed they had accurate information about the location and strength of Allied forces. However, the Ghost Army's deceptions made them question the reliability of this intelligence. For German troops on the ground, the experience of facing an invisible enemy took a significant psychological toll. Imagine being stationed near a supposed Allied division, only to realize after hours of hearing tanks rumbling and soldiers marching that there were no troops at all, just an elaborate hoax. These realizations undermined the Germans' confidence in their ability to anticipate Allied movements, causing frustration and uncertainty among their ranks. One of the most effective examples of psychological warfare occurred during Operation Fortitude, when the Germans were convinced that the main Allied invasion would take place at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Even after the D-Day landings, the Germans hesitated to move their reinforcements from Calais to Normandy, convinced that the real invasion was still to come. This hesitation, caused by the Ghost Army's deceptions, gave the Allies the time they needed to secure their foothold in France. The psychological impact of the Ghost Army's work wasn't just limited to specific battles, it had a broader, long-term effect on German morale. As the Ghost Army continued to stage fake operations and create phantom armies, the Germans became increasingly unsure of where the next real attack would come from. This constant state of confusion wore down their ability to plan and respond effectively. The more the Germans doubted their intelligence, the less capable they became of making decisive moves. In some cases, the Ghost Army's deceptions led to German commanders diverting critical resources to areas where no Allied forces existed. Entire divisions of German troops were sent to defend against phantom armies, leaving other fronts vulnerable to real attacks. These misallocations of manpower and equipment weakened the German defense, contributing to the overall success of the Allied war effort. The psychological warfare employed by the Ghost Army wasn't just about confusing the enemy, it was about controlling the narrative of the battlefield. By manipulating what the Germans saw and heard, the Ghost Army effectively shaped their perception of the war. This form of warfare, which used fear and uncertainty as weapons, demonstrated that psychological tactics could be just as powerful as physical ones. The Ghost Army's success in psychological warfare helped pave the way for modern military deception techniques, many of which are still used today. Their ability to create doubt and confusion in the enemy's mind proved to be a valuable asset, one that extended beyond the battlefield and influenced the outcome of a war. As we move to the final chapters of the Ghost Army's story, we will look at the experiences of the soldiers who served in this secretive unit, the personal stories of bravery and creativity that defined their mission, and the legacy they left behind in the world of military tactics. The Hidden Heroes, stories of the soldiers in the Ghost Army. Behind the success of the Ghost Army were the individual soldiers who brought their unique talents, creativity, and bravery to the battlefield. These men, many of whom were artists, actors, sound engineers, and designers before the war, became the hidden heroes of one of the most secretive and innovative units in World War II. While they didn't fight with weapons or engage directly in combat, their contributions were no less critical to the success of the Allied war effort. This chapter is dedicated to their stories of ingenuity, courage, and a commitment to using their skills in service of their country. One of the most notable soldiers in the Ghost Army was Bill Blass, a young man who would later go on to become a world-famous fashion designer. During the war, Blass was part of the Ghost Army's creative team, using his artistic talents to design and build inflatable tanks, jeeps, and trucks. His flair for design made him a natural fit for this unconventional unit, and his contributions helped bring the visual deceptions to life. Blass later described his time in the Ghost Army as a period of great creativity and camaraderie, where soldiers from diverse backgrounds worked together toward a common goal. Another key figure was Ellsworth Kelly, an artist who would go on to become a major figure in 20th century abstract art. During his time in the Ghost Army, Kelly was responsible for helping to create many of the unit's camouflage and decoy operations. His understanding of visual art translated directly into his ability to deceive the enemy by making real Allied forces disappear into the landscape while creating fake forces that appeared entirely convincing. Kelly's work in the Ghost Army required him to think creatively under pressure, using his artistic skills in ways he had never imagined. The unit also included Corporal Stanley Nance, a sound specialist who played a key role in the Ghost Army's sonic deception operations. Nance and his team were responsible for recording the sounds of tanks, trucks, and soldiers and playing them back through massive loudspeakers to create the illusion of a large army on the move. Nance's expertise in sound engineering allowed him to layer different sounds, matching the terrain and weather conditions to make the fake forces seem even more real. His work was crucial in creating the auditory component of the Ghost Army's deceptions, adding another layer of realism to the visual tricks. Arthur Shillstone, a combat artist, captured the experiences of the Ghost Army through his drawings and paintings. His illustrations of the inflatable tanks, the elaborate deceptions, and the soldiers who carried them out have become some of the most iconic depictions of the Ghost Army's work. Shillstone's artwork provides a rare glimpse into the daily lives of these soldiers, showing the creativity, humor, and determination that defined their time in the unit. Beyond the well-known figures, the Ghost Army was filled with soldiers who brought their own unique talents to the battlefield. Many of these men were amateur artists or had creative backgrounds that were not traditionally associated with military service. Their ability to think outside the box, to create illusions that fooled the enemy, and to adapt their skills to the demands of war made them invaluable assets to the Allied cause. Despite their critical contributions, the soldiers of the Ghost Army remained unsung heroes for many years after the war. The secrecy surrounding their missions meant that their work went largely unrecognized. Many of these soldiers returned to civilian life without ever speaking of the role they played in one of the war's most successful deception campaigns. It wasn't until decades later, when their stories began to surface, that the full extent of their impact was acknowledged. In 2013, the Ghost Army was finally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States, recognizing their bravery, creativity, and contributions to the war effort. This long overdue recognition brought their stories into the spotlight, honoring the men who had used their talents in service of their country in extraordinary ways. As we approach the final chapter of the Ghost Army's story, we will look at the legacy they left behind, how their innovative tactics influenced modern military deception, and the lasting impact they had on the art of warfare. The legacy of the Ghost Army, influence on modern military deception. The Ghost Army may have been a temporary solution for a very specific moment in World War II, but its influence on military tactics extended far beyond the battles of the 1940s. The innovative methods of deception employed by the Ghost Army laid the foundation for many of the strategies used in modern warfare. From psychological operations to advanced camouflage techniques, the legacy of the Ghost Army continues to shape how militaries around the world approach deception and misdirection. One of the most significant impacts of the Ghost Army was its demonstration that deception could be a force multiplier, a way to achieve military objectives without engaging directly in combat. The unit's success in misdirecting the German forces, especially during major operations like D-Day, showed that controlling the enemy's perceptions could be as effective as superior firepower. This idea of shaping the enemy's understanding of the battlefield remains a key component of military strategy today. The Ghost Army's use of visual and sonic deception also influenced the development of new technologies and methods for camouflage and misdirection. During the Cold War, both the US and Soviet militaries adopted similar tactics, using decoys, false communications, and other deceptive measures to confuse their adversaries. Today, the use of drones, decoy tanks, and other advanced technologies in modern militaries can be traced back to the Ghost Army's pioneering efforts in creating realistic but fake military assets. In addition to its tactical contributions, the Ghost Army also played a role in shaping the psychological aspects of warfare. The idea that an army could win battles by instilling doubt, confusion, and fear in the enemy's mind became a powerful tool for psychological operations. This approach, known as psychological warfare, is now a standard part of military planning. The Ghost Army showed that it wasn't just about defeating the enemy physically, it was about manipulating their understanding of what they were facing. The techniques developed by the Ghost Army also found their way into civilian applications, particularly in the fields of advertising, public relations, and film. Many of the artists, designers, and sound engineers who served in the unit went on to successful careers in creative industries, where the lessons they learned about illusion, storytelling, and audience perception were put to use in new ways. Their experiences in the Ghost Army became part of the broader cultural understanding of how art and creativity could influence people's beliefs and behaviors. While the Ghost Army's operations remained classified for many years after the war, their contributions have since been recognized as a critical part of the Allied victory in Europe. The awarding of the Congressional Gold Medal in 2013 helped bring their story to light, ensuring that the men who served in this extraordinary unit would be remembered for their bravery and ingenuity. Their legacy is now studied by military historians and strategists alike, offering valuable insights into the power of deception in warfare. As we reflect on the Ghost Army's incredible journey, it's clear that their work went beyond just fooling the enemy. They showed the world that creativity, intelligence, and unconventional thinking could be just as important on the battlefield as tanks and guns. Their legacy continues to inspire those who seek to use innovation to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Thank you for joining me on this fascinating journey through the history of the Ghost Army. I hope their incredible story of courage, creativity, and deception has inspired you as much as it has inspired me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your suggestions for future topics, and I can't wait to whisper more stories of history with you soon. Until next time, remember, sometimes things aren't always as they seem.